Warning, the following contains spoilers for Netflix's The Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy, Siege, and mild language. Viewer discretion may be advised.
Hi there, I'm Sal Freya, and this is Myriad Media Musings. So, episode 1 of Netflix's Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy, Siege. Overall, I rather liked it. It's a decent start to the show that establishes mood, characterization of the key players, atmosphere, and setting. I do find some parts of the episode questionable, but I'll be getting to those later on. A franchise like Transformers has dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of characters. So, whenever we get a new series and we see which characters that will appear, it's always very satisfying. There are some characters who are guaranteed to appear, of course, but then there are others that you would not expect, especially when some characters are written in ways that you would not really think of when it comes to their overall characterization for the past 35 years. One of those examples is Bumblebee. Now I gotta be honest, Bumblebee has never really been among my personal favorite Transformers characters. I mean, he's there, he is sometimes a fun character, and he is really the perfect kid appeal character and one of the best mascots for any franchise out there. I mean, he's yellow, he's usually a Volkswagen, and he's usually characterized as this sort of younger character that can be sort of an audience surrogate that can connect with the younger human characters of any standard Transformers show. But the way they took Bumblebee in this series is rather interesting. For starters, he is not an Autobot initially. He is a neutral Transformer and is an Energon scavenger and gets wrapped up in this huge conflict between the Autobots and Decepticons. So I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, I really love how they're doing something different with Bumblebee. This has been elaborated in plenty of other stuff like the Transformers The Basics that I mentioned previously. But the thing about the Transformers is that there is not really any huge overarching continuity. There are many different series and shows and plenty of other stories across different universes. Transformers is basically a multiverse franchise. But there are some aspects that need to stick around in order for Hasbro and Takara Tomy, the owners or the company owners of the Transformers, in order to sort of maintain this kind of brand across all the different series so that the audience can have some kind of familiar hook. So the way they took Bumblebee here is rather intriguing. To not make him an Autobot from the start, to make him neutral, to make him want to try to stay out of the war and to try to survive, I really liked, and I really did not expect to see in this kind of series. I mean, for a series called War for Cybertron, I suppose that focusing on the war would be an obvious thing to do. But due to the nature of the franchise, especially for one appealing to kids in general, the war usually in any Transformers series would sort of be basic, good guys versus bad guys. It would be really completely black and white with some exceptions here and there. On the other hand, and this is just purely a nitpick, but yeah, just like I said, I really don't care a whole lot about Bumblebee. But I can sort of see where they're going for this. If I am right, because Bumblebee really is one of the faces of the Transformers and really the kid appeal character. The one character that a lot of people will really know aside from Optimus Prime and Megatron. So I believe what they're doing here is that they're taking one of the best faces of the franchise and easing him into the war And since I see Bumblebee as an audience surrogate character, it could sort of mean that the show is taking us, the audience, directly into the war too, by focusing on a neutral character and making that neutral character see what exactly is going on in this war, and eventually having to make us choose a side. Now they go on about this whole song and dance about Bumblebee being neutral and not sure whether to join. In normal circumstances, that would mean, oh, do I join the good guys or the bad guys? But this is Transformers, and some things need to stay constant. So you just know that Bumblebee will be joining the Autobots at some point. So yeah, if they're gonna make Bumblebee the main character of this Transformers series, like so many others this past decade, I just don't really care at all. So, thank goodness that there are plenty of other characters to care about in this franchise, because so far in this series, the main characters I'm really interested in are the two leads of the main factions, Optimus Prime and Megatron. The writing on Optimus Prime and Megatron is really more in line with their characterization in the Transformers comics. In particular, the ones that are written by IDW Publishing. I'm really fascinated by this because, again, Transformers is usually not this gray when it comes to their characters. And the way they did Optimus Prime and Megatron here, I'm curious to see where it will go. These two clearly have a history. From what we can gather, they seemed to be colleagues under one Transformer, Alpha Trion, but at some point the war broke out, and then the two split off to have their very own different ideals and viewpoints. In this series, with the Decepticons having primary control over Cybertron, Megatron is the one who was the more dominant. Megatron is really a visionary and really pragmatic when it comes to Cybertron and their race. Needing Optimus Prime and the Autobots to accept their treaty, accept his rule, as tyrannical it may be, Megatron feels that it is what is most important for their planet and race as a whole. Peace through tyranny, I believe, is the saying that Megatron said, and it is really in full force here. Megatron is seen as being respectful towards his enemies. He is not some cackling madman who has these wild schemes. Megatron here is a bit more grim and down to earth, and I really like that. Megatron actually is one of my personal favorite Decepticons. So to see him written like this is really a delight, and I can't wait to see where he's going to go in this series with his plotting, dealing with his subordinates, and thinking of ways to undermine and take down his rival. I feel Optimus is the character that the audience will have the most investment for because he is the one that has the most to lose. So a lot of people know Optimus Prime as the warm, kind-hearted, fatherly figure that will not hesitate to wage swift and merciless war when all he holds sacred is threatened. Optimus here can be seen as the idealist, the one who is still clinging to hope, clinging onto his principles, and making sure that he and his men are free above all else, regardless of what Megatron and the Decepticons say. Optimus's phrase, for those who don't know, freedom is the right of all sentient beings, really holds true in this series. As characters like Wheeljack would say, they do not want Megatron's treaty. They do not want any Cybertron that is under him because of Megatron's tyranny. For Optimus, freedom is what is most important. He clings on to his ideals, and he feels what is right, regardless of what Megatron says. And I really like that. It shows for once, Optimus Prime sort of being in over his head and really indicative of how this war is really breaking down a lot of these characters. So yeah, Optimus's characterization is one of the strongest points of this episode, especially because I see it really spilling over into other characters, two in particular. The first being Elita 1. Elita 1, for those who don't know, is usually Optimus Prime's love interest that first started in the original cartoon and has carried over to a few series and stories since then. The way it's done here makes it seem that if they're not love interests, at the very least, they have a very strong respect and connection with each other. Especially because Optimus in this face of defeat is really desperately trying to do all of these operations to hinder the efforts of Megatron. And Elita seems to be for that and yet does not want him to die. If they're not love interests, at the very least, Elita 1 wants to make sure that Optimus will continue to be in the best of shape in order to lead their, frankly, hopeless cause. But while Elita 1 was good, the second character affected by Optimus, Ultra Magnus, was really surprising for me. So while Optimus Prime is the idealistic one among the Autobots, Ultra Magnus is the practical one. He believes in his leader's cause and yet can start to see what Megatron is saying. The Autobots are really losing badly. Their race is fractured. Their homeworld is in ruins. Ultra Magnus is really seeing the wisdom of surrendering in order to preserve their race. And yet Optimus Prime is still stubbornly clinging to what he holds dear and how he and his men really need to be free from Megatron's tyranny, how they need to liberate the planet from Megatron in order to have a peaceful and just society. And Ultra Magnus does not see it that way. I'm really curious to see how they're going to go about this because that is usually not the Ultra Magnus that we see. Ultra Magnus is usually written as the loyal Autobot commander who is following his leader to the very end. And yet here, a more pragmatic and practical Ultra Magnus, a character who at the very end of this episode is seen clandestinely meeting with the Decepticons. A really good hook to the end of that episode, and I really want to see where things will go from here and what will happen to one of my favorite Transformers. So I believe that's it for the major players of this episode. Now, of course, there are plenty of other characters to mention, but I feel at the moment it's too early to talk about them beyond some very basic stuff. In particular, Jetfire and Starscream. We see these two Decepticons as sort of rivals with each other. Jetfire as the military leader, or at the very least, one of the Decepticons' secondary leaders, while Starscream is seen as an arrogant, ambitious, silver-tongued upstart who is just trying to be chummy to Megatron in order to get his own shot at power. Typical Starscream behavior, I say, and I'm wondering how they're going to do Starscream wanting power in this series, since that kind of thing is to be expected for Transformers by now. The animation and stiff movements of the characters unfortunately lead me to the only real negative thing I see about this episode, and I am wondering if that might be this series' major flaw, which is the action. You know, this being a series about giant transforming robots, you'd expect there to be a lot of action, but so far for this episode I feel the action to be rather questionable. We certainly do get some action. The fight with Optimus and Megatron. Well, not really a fight, but more like Megatron really kicking his ass. The out-of-nowhere fight between Jetfire, Starscream, and all the Seekers. Those were really the only two action segments, and they really did not look all that impressive. It almost seemed like as if somebody was doing stop motion with the toys themselves. I mean, of course, these characters are toys, but that doesn't have to mean that the animation has to make them 100% completely like them. It at times felt a little bit lifeless, and when the action scenes did happen, among the two, it was really only the latter one which I felt any kind of emotion to it or felt invested, and that was primarily because of Optimus. But when it came to the other action sequence, and really the action as a whole, I feel it could have been done better. But again, this is just the first episode. Maybe it'll get better. And I will admit that I am a lot more to Transformers because of the story. But at the same time, giant fighting robots need giant fighting robot action. And I feel, I mean, I don't want to say it's awful, but the action of the episode I felt wasn't that good either. The very mild profanity usage in this episode, too, really took me out of it because it felt like something that they just inserted there for the heck of it, especially since it's a term that they normally wouldn't use. Wheeljack saying the word ass. It just felt odd to me. Aside from the fact that it's Wheeljack, who is normally a kind of a gruff, mad scientist inventor, I would expect Wheeljack to be more scientific about it, or to say like tailpipe, any of the terms that Transformers would use normally for their anatomy, but the word ass? Wheeljack saying ass? It just took me out of it. I mean, there's anything bad or anything about that, and I'm not saying, oh, how dare for the children, especially since ass is not really one of those huge major swear words. I mean, if Wheeljack started saying, like, the F-bomb or something like that, then yeah, that would be questionable, but that, Wheeljack saying ass, I don't know, just felt really bizarre. Given that this series is on Netflix and is really different from what the general audience feels on what Transformers is, I feel this series will really appeal to those newcomers to Transformers, those who are aware of the franchise but don't know a whole lot about it, and for those fans in the middle like myself. The long-timers, the hardcores, might see some worth in this series, but given how a lot of its setting and atmosphere and characters has been written before in stuff like the comic books or some other stories like that, I feel for those long-timers there might not be anything particularly new. But given that there are still some episodes to go, 6 episodes if I'm not mistaken, which still feels pretty short, but whatever, I feel the long-timers may need some time for it to really get to them. So what did you guys think? Did you guys like the episode? Or what was your favorite character in this story? What was your favorite moment? Anything in particular you didn't like? Did you happen to like the action? While I didn't, let me know in the comment section below. And I believe that's it for now. So thank you all guys for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my Twitter and Instagram. Links in the description will be below as well. So yeah, that's all for me for now. So I'll be seeing you guys around for episode 2 of Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy Siege. I'm Sal Freya, and this has been Myriad Media Musings. See you around!